The hero fights the Demon King. The finale is an invulnerable hero. The castle is surrounded by purple crystals and purple lightning bolts. The sky above it is red. Siege of the Demon King's castle. A black dragon hits the ground with a purple laser from its mouth. On the ground, people in steel armor are fighting monsters. The horned werewolf bit the armored man's arm. A broken shield and sword lie next to the fallen soldier. The monster army let out a ferocious roar. Two soldiers stand with their backs to each other, surrounded by the battle. One of them shouts that they won't be able to hold them off for long and their attacks are too strong. Another replied that they could only pray that their hero had managed to defeat the Demon King. Glancing at the castle, the soldier wondered if he had been there all day and if he would be able to win. A girl with long brown eyes is lying on the floor. Her eyes snapped open. In a room with a cracked floor, the hero and the Demon King stand together. The Demon King told Yas that by killing him, he would finally be able to take over this land again and be the lord of the entire world. Frowning, Yasu replied that he wouldn't let him do that. Demon King Maliati grinned and told him to finish it. It's just colored, and there are red lines drawn on top of it. The red lines are signed. This thing adds electrical effects. Yasu answered him with a frown. His speech bubble is empty, and it is not colored. Blue lines are drawn on top of it. They are signed. Yasu's electrical effects are different from the Demon King's. The main character's name is Zhu Yingsu. He draws Yasya on a graphic tablet. He is 25 years old, single, and makes a living painting manhwa. Zhu Yingsu is shaking and crying while looking at the graphic tablet. He lost his job today. He remembered the man in the meeting shouting at him about his manhwa hero fighting the Demon King being read by fewer people every month. He shouted that the rating had dropped to 4.8, and the number of likes, comments, and bookmarks had also greatly decreased. The man told him to draw the last chapter and get out of here. The main character is sitting at a desk in a dark office. Sobbing, he said that they treated him like a puppy following orders, but one day he would make them regret it. He thought he would draw a comic book that would be amazing. It was raining outside the building, where one window was lit. Lightning erupted over the building. The lamp flickered with electricity and went out. Zhu Yingsu exclaimed that the building's lights were turned off and he didn't keep his job. He leaned back in his chair and thought about how even the gods were getting in his way. The screen of the graphics tablet lit up purple. The main character looked at him in surprise. Getting up from his chair, he looked at the lamp and thought it was strange. Stretching out his palm towards the graphics tablet, Zhu Yingsu wondered why his monitor was still lit up. Purple lightning bolts enveloped the tablet. Lightning filled the entire room, and the protagonist screamed for help and fright. The building's window glowed bright purple. The tablet screen went blank. The main character flew through the purple space that looked like space with a shout. The voice greeted him and introduced itself as Luna, caretaker of the borders of the manhwa world. Luna greeted him in the world of manhwa hero fights Demon King and said that the current rating is 4.8. Zhu Yingsu asked in surprise where this voice came from and who is the border guard. The voice announced the preparation of the guest's transformation and started counting down. After the countdown, the voice said that the transformation process had begun. The main character asked her what she was going to do with him. He looked down at his hands, which were shrouded in yellow flames. He looked down at himself in surprise and, exclaiming that he was on fire, shouted. The main character noticed something ahead. The voice announced that the transformation was complete and asked him to enjoy the journey. There was a bright white light in front of Zhu Yingsu. He asked to wait, asking where the exit was, and shouted. Shrouded in flames, he began to fall to the ground and asked what kind of place it was. In front of him was a landscape with mountains, villages, and a huge castle. The main character exclaimed that this was the Pant continent. He said that he had really entered the world of manhwa. Below him was a battlefield full of people and monsters. The soldier exclaimed that something was falling from the sky. The main character was falling towards the Demon King's castle, which was shrouded in purple lightning. The soldier exclaimed that it was heading straight for the Demon King's castle. Zhu Yingsu screamed loudly as he fell down. He fell into the castle with an explosion. Smoke was coming from the castle tower. Under the smoke, the silhouette of a man in armor could be seen. Sitting down, he said that he was in pain, and this is what he gets for not sleeping at night because of this manhwa. He asked me what the strange dream was. With a slight frown, he said that he was dreaming that he was in his own manhwa. He wondered if he should write a story about immersion in the game in the next part. Another armored man called out to him, and the protagonist turned around. Yasu frowned and asked how he, a second-class soldier, had broken through the Demon King's barrier and smashed the palace to pieces. The main character looked at himself in surprise and realized that he had turned into a character of his manhwa. As he got to his feet, he noticed that everything felt real and he wasn't sleeping. The Demon King in front of him held a sword that glowed purple in his hand. Zhu Yingsu thought about how he was very strong and was standing in front of him right now. Maliati, shrouded in purple energy, said that another bug had arrived from somewhere and he would deal with it now. The pink-haired girl behind him asked why he was frozen. Frowning, she asked if he could see that the hero was about to fight the Demon King. She shouted that if he stood between them, he was doomed to die. The girl shouted at him to get out of there quickly. Zhu Yingsu thought that Tia was actually very beautiful. He noticed what she said about the battle and realized that this was the place he had just drawn. Gritting his teeth, he thought that this meant that in a second, Moriarty would start attacking. The floor under the Demon King's foot cracked, and he leaped forward. Zhu Yingsu covered his face with his hands and screamed, telling him not to approach. Yasu took off and the Demon King's sword pierced through his body. The protagonist's eyes widened. Yasu was standing in front of him, blocking him out. Tia called out to Yasuya in a frightened voice with tears in her eyes. Moriarty drew his sword, and Yasu fell to the ground. The main character and Tia walked over to Yas, who was lying on the ground. Tia asked him why he had decided to save him. She asked who would defeat the Demon King if he died. The main character was surprised to think about what was going on here and that this was not what he was going to draw at all. Yasu tearfully replied that he didn't know and that he couldn't move. He said that he felt that for Zhu Yingsu's sake, he had to go to any lengths, even death. Closing his eyes, he asked to protect this world. The main character called out to him with a frown. Numerous warning signs appeared in front of him. He wondered what they were warning him about. The voice said that the sudden death of the main male character Yasu led to a reduction in the rating to 3.4. The voice said that the rating fell below stable indicators, and the world of the hero fighting the Demon King will soon collapse. Through the hole in the tower, you can see the red sky with the moon. The Demon King ordered the whiting to stop. He said that Yasu died at his hands, and this can be said to be a contribution to the Great King's reign. Tia said that he wasn't worthy of being the lord of the world. Moriarty asked if he was unworthy. He said that the fools who sealed him for 1,000 years had said the same thing, but now they were dead and he was still alive. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist frowned and thought that now was not the time to make him angry. Standing menacingly in front of them, Moriarty asked how they could stop him if the hero of this world was dead. He said this world would be his now. Tia tapped her staff on the floor and said that even though the hero was dead, her kingdom's army wouldn't give up so easily. Holding out a staff wrapped in blue energy, she frowned and told him not to even think about running the world. The Demon King raised his hand in front of him and said that they were hard to deal with. He waved his hand, and Tia was thrown to the side. She hit the wall and fell to the floor. Moriarty asked mockingly about her being the best magician in the world. He said that without a hero who dared to stand in front of him, even their spells were useless, and that was ridiculous. He said that he would deal with Zhu Yingsu first, then kill her, the queen, in front of her entire state. He added that its troops would disintegrate on their own. The Demon King glanced at the protagonist who was sitting next to Yasu's body. Looking at it, the protagonist thought that he couldn't move and wanted to escape, but he couldn't even get up. He thought that although there were many unpleasant places in his work and life, but he was born in a peaceful time, and he had never been in such dangerous situations. Remembering how he had drawn Moriarty, he thought that the person in front of him wanted to kill him, but he was just a character he had drawn. He wondered if he should be afraid of him. The Demon King swung his sword in front of him and shouted for him to die. His kick broke the floor, and the main character jumped out of the way. He fell to the ground, gritting his teeth, shrouded in purple electricity. Opening one eye, he thought he was in pain. Zhu Yingsu thought about how he had managed to evade it. The Demon King was standing in front of him, and the main character's foot was lying on the floor between them. Realizing that he had lost a leg, the protagonist screamed in pain. The Demon King walked up to him and grabbed his head with his hand. He said that he dodged his punch and asked how long his luck would be with him. The main character thought that this pain is real and he will not be able to escape. Tia, grimacing, shouted at him to stop and told him that he was just a simple soldier and there was no reason for him to kill him. After lifting the main character off the ground, the Demon King told him to die. Zhu Yingsu thought that next, Moriarty would definitely use the Demon King's sword to chop off his head. He thought that he was sure of this because he had personally prescribed his addictions. On the screen it says, character, violent, wayward, control freak. Addictions, likes to execute his victims by cutting off their heads. The Demon King struck the main character's neck with his sword. Zhu Yingsu blocked the blow with his sword. The place where the blades met glowed brightly with lightning. Tia was surprised to see that it was Yasu's sword and wondered when he had picked it up. The main character frowned, gritting his teeth, and thought that as soon as Moriarty chopped off his right leg, he was right next to Yasu's sword. Took advantage of the moment and grabbed it while Moriarty was lifting him off the ground, hiding the sword in the blind zone for Moriarty. The Demon King grinned and cursed. The main character noticed and surprised that Yasu's sword was cracked. He thought about how this was possible, since his description said that this sword and the Demon King's sword were equally strong. He assumed that he couldn't fully utilize the power of the sword because he was too weak. Grinning, Moriarty said that his luck was up. Nervously looking at the cracked sword, the protagonist realized that he had no idea what to do. He thought about how he didn't want to die. Tears welled up in his eyes, and he thought that in the real world, he was a nobody, and once in his own manhwa, he would let others control him again. Zhu Yingsu thought that he had created this world, and he was the author of Manhwa. With tears in his eyes, the main character shouted that he had created them all. The Demon King swung his sword. The main character fell to the ground. He noticed that it was fine and wondered why he didn't cut it up. Glancing at the Demon King, he noticed that he was disappearing. Moriarty asked what he had just said. He said that he shouted that he had created them and asked what it meant. He asked what he had done with it. As he disappeared, he shouted that it couldn't be, and there was no such power in this world. The Demon King shattered into small pieces. The main character opened his mouth in surprise. Tia screamed, and he turned toward her voice. She watched in horror as her body disappeared. She looked at Zhu Yingsu with tears in her eyes and asked him to save her. The main character called out her name tensely. He stretched out his hand, but it shattered into many pieces. Crouching down, he wondered what had happened. He noticed that not only Priyati and Chia were disappearing, but the dead Yasu was also disappearing. Yasu's body also shattered into many pieces. The Demon King's castle disappears. The main character thought about why this happened. He noticed a blue dialogue box in front of him that said, because the visitor said a forbidden phrase, indicated their identity, the rating of the comic was reduced to 0. The world of Manhwa is beginning to collapse. The island of land with the Demon King's castle crumbles into fragments. The dialogue boxes say, all characters, platforms, and settings will disappear in 1 minute. We ask all visitors to leave this place immediately. Zhu Yingsu thought about the words that he had revealed his identity and that the Manhwa world was about to disappear. He asked me to at least tell him how to leave this place. A blue button appeared in front of him, which says Ctrl+Q. Frowning, he thought that this was a combination for exiting the drawing program. He assumed that if he pressed this button, he would be able to exit the Manhwa world and return to the real world. The main character pressed the button with his index finger. When he clicked it again, he noticed that it didn't work, and nothing happens after clicking it. The dialog box announced the determination of the reason for the exit failure. The dialog box said, error number, GXJ3173, the user died in reality. Cause of death, electric shock. The dialog box showed Zhu Yingsu lying dead on the floor not far from the tablet glowing with purple electricity. Opening his eyes in shock, the main character said that this means that before entering Manhwa, he died from an electric shock. He asked me what he was now. Looking down at his hands, he saw that they were crumbling into small pieces. The main character realized that he, too, was beginning to disappear. He frowned. Zhu Yingsu shouted out what would happen to him after disappearing if he couldn't come out. On the blue dialogue boxes, the word death was written in all languages of the world. Crouching down, he asked if there was no way to stop it. A red button appeared in front of him with the inscription, Ctrl+Z. The blue dialogue boxes said that the destruction of the world has already entered the final phase, and there is no way to stop the process. The dialogue box prompted him to click on a button to rewrite the author's fate. Zhu Yingsu looked at the button in surprise. The Demon King's castle slowly crumbled into pieces. The main character, sitting on the ground, asked what it means to rewrite fate. The dialogue box says that this Manhwa world is 3 minutes away from disappearing, and if the visitor died in the real world and there is no way to exit, the soul will be destroyed. The dialogue box says that if the soul dies, absolute death will occur. Trembling and frowning, the protagonist repeated the words, absolute death. A dialogue box called for him to click on a button to reset all the content of the Manhwa Hero Fights the Demon King published by him in 2022 on the internet. The dialogue box explained that in this way, the world can be revived, and his soul will temporarily escape the danger of absolute death. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu asked if he would go back to 2022 and redraw Manhwa. The dialogue box replied that everything is correct, and the content of the Manhwa that the audience read in 2022 will be completely replaced with the version after the update. The main character asked if this was a rewriting of history. He said that if he redraws the already published Manhwa, he will make it even better. Opening his eyes in surprise, he said that this means that he will be able to change the rating of his comic. He thought that in reality, he had died from an electric shock just because his Manhwa rating was too low, and the boss had decided to fire him. If he still manages to raise the rating of the new comic, then this will not happen. The main character said in surprise that if he raised the rating, he would be able to resurrect. The dialogue box replied that everything was correct, and if he didn't die in reality, he could click the exit button and return to the real world. The main character asked if everything could really work out. The dialogue box replied that if the rating of the redrawn Manhwa was not much higher than the original version, it would not be possible to change fate and avoid death, and eventually absolute death would occur. Zhu Yingsu thought that it wouldn't be easy after all. Grimacing, he asked how he would know the ranking if he was currently inside the Manhwa world. The dialogue box replied that it will broadcast the entire situation with the updated manhwa in real time, including the rating, number of likes, subscriptions, bookmarks, and comments. It said that in this way, he will be able to determine the direction of the plot and adjust it at any time, and his life will depend on this comic. The dialogue box said that through the screen, he and the readers would have to complete the story together. It asked if he wanted to upgrade manhwa. Frowning, the protagonist replied that he wished to. He thought that he would definitely create a better manhwa and get out of here alive. He noticed that something else had appeared. Next to the reset button was written, the number of possible uses is 3. To reset manhwa, you need to spend all the accumulated likes of the first edition. He thought about the fact that this button can only be used 3 times, and that he didn't think that readers' likes could save someone's life. The dialogue box reported that the manhwa world was 5 seconds away from completely disappearing. Zhu Yingsu said that a mature author, despite all the storms and tribulations, should be calm and unruffled. The countdown to the disappearance of the manhwa world has begun. The main character waved his finger and thanked readers for likes, subscriptions, and bookmarks. He pressed the reset button. Darkness enveloped everything. The main world is being updated. The update is complete. Stabilization of the main world. Stabilization is complete. The rating of manhwa returned to the initial indicator of 5.0. A state of stability was achieved. The login process begins. The loading scale gradually filled up to 100%. The update is complete. The voice called out to Yasya. A voice called out to Zhu Yingsu, telling him to wake up quickly. He opened his eyes, dressed in ragged rags and a steel collar with a chain. Remembering how his leg had been chopped off, he looked down and found that his leg was still there. An elderly man with a mustache said he finally woke up and scared him. He asked why he suddenly fainted if he was fine. He said he thought he was dying. The main character recognized Uncle Ben, a character from the extras of his comic book. He realized that this was a scene from the first chapter of his manhwa in which Yasyu was still a slave and was digging a mine with magic minerals. People in chains extract minerals with a pickaxe. One of them greeted a man with purple hair, accompanied by 2 armored men. Zhu Yingsu thought that after resetting manhwa, he didn't need to redraw it again, and now he was a participant in it himself. He thought about how he was a slave now, just like Yasyu. Lisai, the slave owner, called out to the 2 slaves and asked them who allowed them to relax and if they wanted to die. Uncle Ben came up to him apologetically and said that Zhu Yingsu had just fainted. Lisai, hands clasped behind his back, replied that since he had fainted, there was nothing to be done. Uncle Ben was glad that he understood. Lisai punched him in the face and shouted that he had only seen 2 slaves with their eyes open, slacking off from their work. Uncle Ben fell to the ground. Lisai happily said that now the slave actually fainted. With a frown, the protagonist called out to Uncle Ben. Lisai told them that they had to do twice as much work today. Glaring menacingly at the protagonist, he said that their working day would only end when they handed over the minerals for 4 people. Otherwise, he would chop off their hands and then give them to the wild beasts to eat. Frowning, the protagonist obeyed and thought about how, let alone raising the manhwa ranking, he couldn't even think of a way to get out of this cave alive. While extracting minerals with a pickaxe, Zhu Yingsu thought that he had become a slave to the character that he had drawn himself. He asked if there were any more unhappy authors in the world than he was. Uncle Ben is chewing on a loaf of bread. Sitting on the ground near the wall, he said to the main character he dragged him into this, but when he comes to his senses, he will definitely help him. Zhu Yingsu turned around and said that it was fine and told him to rest. He thought that everything was not normal because he used to sit in front of the computer for 10 hours every day, had a sedentary lifestyle, and now suddenly he has to mine ore and it's too difficult for him. He added that his lower back hurts. As he continued to mine for minerals, he asked Uncle Ben if he knew where Yasyu was. He asked if there was a person with that name in their mine. Opening his eyes in surprise, he asked about the fact that he didn't know Yasya. Zhu Yingsu thought, how can this be, since Yasyu is the main character and everyone here should know him, especially since he grew up in front of Uncle Ben. A blue dialog box announced the launch of the system search function. After announcing that the search was complete, it reported that there was no character named Yasyu in the world of this manhwa, and the name of the main character was Zhu Yingsu. The main character frowned in surprise. He asked if it was a joke. He said that it would be a disaster for him to become the main character instead of Yasyu. He thought of the Demon King's castle crumbling to pieces. Covering his mouth with his hand, he thought that he couldn't reveal his identity because it was forbidden, otherwise the rating would be reset again and the world would collapse. Looking at Zhu Yingsu fussily waving his head and muttering, Uncle Ben thought that he had become somewhat strange after fainting. Turning around, the protagonist thought about how Uncle Ben didn't see the pop-up window, and for him, he was just talking to the air. He assumed he thought he was sick. The dialog box reported that it could see or hear his inner voice. Pointing to a black window with white edges, the protagonist mentally asked if his thoughts were written on it. The dialog box responded that it did. Zhu Yingsu thought with a disappointed face that he was in Manhwa after all. He noticed that the wall in front of him was covered with purple cracks. Uncle Ben asked what was going on. The wall in front of the main character exploded. Uncle Ben said in surprise that there were too many strange things going on today. The main character stared ahead, his mouth hanging open in silence. There was a huge pit in front of him. He realized that it was a pit that appeared after the earthquake in the first version of the plot. Ona thought that Yasuo had accidentally fallen into it and awakened his powers, and from there he began his perilous journey from slave to hero. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu wondered why she had appeared now since there was no earthquake. He assumed that because his behavior was different from Yasuo's, there was a change in the timeline and Yama appeared earlier. He noticed a blue dialogue box. On it, it was written that each of his actions affects the plot or changes it. Moreover, it affects the rating of Manhwa. The dialogue box asked him to think carefully about his next actions. With a determined frown, the protagonist thought that since he was now the main character, everything that was happening to him now was a repetition of the plot of the first chapter, and the beginning of the work would determine whether people would continue to read it, and this was vital for him. He figured that if you didn't get your readers involved quickly, they could easily flip through this page in a few seconds. He imagined a reader quickly flipping through a Manhwa list. Zhu Yingsu thought that he should make the plot more exciting. He told Uncle Ben that he wanted to go down there for a while. He asked if he could cover it. Uncle Ben shouted at him not to do anything stupid. The main character replied with a serious face that he had a good reason to jump there, even though he couldn't explain anything to him. He said if he didn't come back in half a day, tell everyone that he was dead. He added that if he succeeded, they would never work here again. Trembling, Uncle Ben asked what kind of nonsense he was talking and said that he was crazy. Zhu Yingsu kicked off the ground and jumped into the pit. He thought about how the author had become the main character. As he fell into the pit, he thought that if he could raise the rating, he would have life waiting for him, and if he couldn't, he would have death waiting for him. Frowning, he falls down, thinking that this is exciting. Yasuo floats in a dark space. He frowned and made a sound without opening his eyes. Underground magic mine, deserted area. There are many sharp magic minerals at the bottom of the pit. The main character continues to fall deeper into the mine. The main character swims in the slime, taking air in his mouth. He was glad that the slime that saved Yasuo's life was still here. He thought that he knew it would be like this, but he still almost fainted from fear. Zhu Yingsu thought that this thing would spit him out now. Spilling the slime, the monster spat out the main character into the wall. Getting up from the ground, the main character thought it was too sticky. The slime slithered away irritably. Zhu Yingsu noticed his pickaxe in front of him. He assumed that she had fallen with him. As he picked up the pickaxe, he thought that he couldn't have collected so many magic minerals with his bare hands. The passage in front of him was full of huge magic minerals. Magic minerals are one of the most important resources in this world. The magical energy stored inside them can charge magical mechanisms, just like fuel in the real world. They can also provide the mage with the energy base to use magic. They can even be used as a currency. The more noble a person is, the more magic minerals they have. In a month, the Demon King Maliati will completely break the seal and rule the land. If Zhu Yingsu could prepare more minerals now, it would be easier for him to deal with future problems. The main character stands surrounded by minerals, holding his lower back. Behind the minerals, several monsters were watching him. Frowning, the protagonist turned around. The monsters attacked him, and the protagonist exclaimed that they were scavengers. He thought about how these three scavengers were the first monsters that Yasuo had killed in the first version of Manhwa. As he ran away, Zhu Yingsu turned around and thought that these creatures only ate rot, and Yasuo was only able to defeat them thanks to the brute strength he had gained from decades spent in the mine. He thought about Yasuo's muscles, comparing them to his own, and frowned in frustration. He thought that he was just a weak Manhwa rider, and if he died at the hands of scavengers, it would just be the stupidest end, and he had better stay away from them. Scavenger paw hit the main character in the back. His punch left 3 huge cuts on his back, and he screamed in pain. He fell to the ground. Gritting his teeth, he cursed. Zhu Yingsu thought that they were faster than he expected. He thought that he couldn't let them capture him, otherwise they would kill him, and when his body decomposed, they would devour him. The scavengers were standing in front of him, baring their huge teeth. They opened their drooling mouths viciously. The main character frowned and thought that it would not be so easy for them. He threw 3 white balls at them. The scavengers looked up in surprise. Zhu Yingsu thought that as an author, he knew more about the scavengers' secrets than Yasuo. The scavenger was shrouded in flames. The main character thought that they seem invincible, but they have something to be afraid of. He charged, shouting loudly and swinging his pickaxe. He stabs the scavenger in the chest with a pickaxe. Leaping forward, he was caught between 2 scavengers. Glancing at one of them, he asked if they wanted to eat it. Scavenger shook his head in panic. The main character stood surrounded by fallen scavengers. Breathing heavily, he thought it was fresh food. There was a loaf of bread sticking out of his pocket, and he thought that even a small piece of bread would break their throats. Zhu Yingsu looked at the red dialogue box in front of him in surprise. On it was written, attribute points obtained, 6. Instant kill bonus points, 3. Total points, 9. Please distribute them. The status window read, Zhu Yingsu, slave. Power, -1. Magic, 0. Stamina, 1. Agility, 1. Insight, 2. Number of unallocated points, 9. The main character was happy and said that he finally had a hero panel like Yasu and now he can become stronger. When he saw the negative value of his power, he frowned in displeasure. A blue dialog box appeared above the status window and said, low-level system detected. The takeover process is underway. The main character asked what it was going to do. The dialog box says, the takeover is complete, the system is being updated. Completed, please use the pro version of the hero panel. The status window turned blue. The dialog box asked to say add power points. Zhu Yingsu noticed that it had become even smarter and Yishu had to do it all by hand. He called the receptionist. The blue dialog box responded. He said, power +4. Picking up the pickaxe, he exclaimed that the pickaxe that he had barely been able to lift was now as light as a feather. Looking to the side, he said, dexterity +4. The administrator agreed. The main character exclaimed that now the scavengers will definitely not catch up with him. The dialog box reported that he had one unused point. Frowning, Zhu Yingsu thought that the most important thing was to increase strength and agility and said to invest this point in magic. The dialog box announced that adding points was completed. Noticing a sharp change in himself, the main character thought that the value of magic in the range between 0 and 1 is a very important point, and this means that from an ordinary person he turned into a real magician. The administrator said that everything is correct. The main character thought that now you need to collect magic minerals. He asked the administrator to activate the hero backpack feature. A blue backpack appeared in front of him, and a dialog box announced that the backpack feature was activated. The main character shouted that he wanted to dig deep. He was crouched among the minerals. Quickly running along the magic minerals, he smashed and lifted them into the air. The dialog box reported that all resources are collected automatically. The shards of magic minerals went into the blue backpack. The dialog box reported that 10 tons of high-precision minerals have been accumulated, and the amount continues to increase. Exhaling heavily, Zhu Yingsu thought that he was tired. The dialog box reported that 25 tons of high-precision minerals had been collected. The main character was glad that there is such a convenient function, and asked if he was too greedy because Yasu took only 1 ton. Turning around, he noticed that there were magic minerals everywhere just now, but it wasn't so bright here. Noticing the thin layer of blue energy, he assumed it was a magical barrier. The dialog box reported that this barrier was installed by Zhu Yingsu on March 29, 2022. The main character noticed that it used a date from the real world and thought that he did not remember putting up any barrier in this place. He asked if it could be removed. The dialog box replied that the owner of the barrier can easily remove it. It announced that the barrier had been lifted. The blue barrier disappeared. Zhu Yingsu walked forward and said that there was nothing special here. He looked away, frowning. In front of him was a huge monster that let out a loud roar. Trembling with fear, he realized that it was the Underground King and said that it couldn't be because he couldn't think of a way for Yasu to defeat him, so he cut out the original version and threw it in the trash. The blue dialog box says, a character drawn by the author in real life, but not suitable, cannot completely disappear. It is placed in a magic barrier and is trapped there. Zhu Yingsu was surprised when he recalled drawing the Underground King and asked about the fact that an unusable character couldn't disappear. The dialog box says, secret mission received, kill the Underground King. Standing in front of the Underground King, the protagonist asked if this was a joke. He said that this must be a mistake, because at this level, the main character can't kill such a creature. The dialog box says, this is the climax of the story. If the hero refuses the task, with a high probability, the rating of Manhwa will greatly decrease. Zhu Yingsu gritted his teeth in surprise and recalled the dialog boxes labeled death. The Underground King let out a loud growl as he stretched out a paw. The main character dodged with a jump, and the monster's paw hit the ground. The crystal on the Underground King's head glowed bright red. The main character looked at him in fright. He remembered creating this monster. He said that he was just a killer because he was not only incredibly strong, but also very agile. He said that the most powerful thing is the horn on his head, which can shoot high-energy magic beams. Laughing, he said that it would be hard for Yasu to deal with him. The main character thought that he hated himself. The Underground King shot out a huge red beam. The cave in front of him exploded. It is shrouded in flames. The Underground King looks around the burning cave. The main character came out of the ground. When the monster saw him, it reached out and grabbed him. The main character screamed in fear. The Underground King squeezed it in his hand. Zhu Yingsu screamed loudly in pain, his eyes bulging. He realized that his ribs were broken. Looking at the Underground King, he wondered if he was mocking him, and taking revenge on him for being the author because he made it up and then removed it and locked it in this place. The protagonist's eyes rolled back in his head and he thought that he was dying. He turned to the administrator and shouted that he wanted to use the cancellation to restart Manhwa. The dialogue box reported that the current number of likes is 20 and the conditions for triggering cancellation were not met. The main character swore. The Underground King raised his other hand over him. Zhu Yingsu stared in horror at the huge claw approaching. He thought about how he was about to crush it and how he was just a hero in the initial stage who had only killed 3 scavengers. Closing his eyes, he thought that he didn't have any special items or companions, and with his current strength level, there was no way he could get out of the monster's clutches. He wondered what he should do and if he had anything. His inventory appeared on the dialogue box, and the dialogue box reported that his dashboard was open. The protagonist's eyes flew open, and when he saw the magic minerals in his inventory, he thought that he had a way. Closing one eye, he shouted at the administrator to throw all 25 tons of magic crystals at the Underground King. The blue backpack soared into the air, and a dialogue box announced that the magic minerals had been discarded. Purple crystals rained down from the backpack towards the Underground King. He opened his hand, and the protagonist, looking down, thought that if he fell like this, he would break, and this time the slime would not catch him. He thought that even though he only had 5 dexterity, if he concentrated all of it on his legs, he might be able to do it. Kicking off the falling crystal with his feet, he leaped forward. Kicking off the crystals, he landed on the ground. The dialogue box announced that all the minerals had been emptied. In front of Zhu Yingsu was a huge mountain of purple minerals. Sitting up, he looked ahead, wondering if he had killed him. He realized that he hadn't killed her because there was no notification from the system. After scattering the minerals, the Underground King straightened up, growling loudly. Trembling, the main character looked at him in fright and said that he was finished. The monster glared at him. In the mine, a voice shouts for the old man to confess. Uncle Ben is chained to a wooden pole. Licky told him that if one didn't tell him where Zhu Yingsu was, he would kill him. Uncle Ben thought that he couldn't tell them where he was because if they filled up the hole, he would never be able to get out. He spat and told him to go to away. Lisai was furiously silent. He pressed his palm to his chest, and Uncle Ben asked what he was doing. Purple electricity surrounded them. Uncle Ben, who was twitching convulsively from the electricity, said that he would tell you everything. Lisai told him to speak while removing his hand that was shrouded in electricity. Uncle Ben, with a tired face covered in tears, replied that he would say that his hair looked disgusting. Lisai frowned furiously. He swung his electricity-shrouded fist and told him to die. He punched out, but the hand caught him. Licky and Uncle Ben opened their eyes in surprise. Zhu Yingsu stood between them. He apologized for coming too late. Lisai said he was a good boy because he had come back to him. He asked if he was ready to chop off his hands and feed them to the monsters. With an awkward grin, the protagonist said that he wasn't ready. He thought that he was really a fool, and the original readers had already discussed him. He remembered the comment that said Lisai was a fool. Zhu Yingsu thought about how he could now see that they were right in their harsh remarks. Licky held up a hand with a magic seal in front of it and said that it would be an honor for Zhu Yingsu to die at his hands. The main character in his thoughts asked him to stop repeating this because readers will mock him again. Lisai ordered the slave to be chained up. The main character was wrapped in chains. Uncle Ben cursed in fright. Lisai was holding a chain in his hand that wrapped around the main character. He asked if he knew why he wanted to learn the magic of electricity. He said it was because it was most suitable for chained slaves. His hand glowed with purple energy and he sent a current through the circuit. A discharge of electricity hit the main character. Uncle Ben called out his name. In a cloud of dust, you can see the silhouette of the main character. He said it scared him. Lisai tugged on the chain, startled, asking how this was possible. The main character opened his mouth in surprise and thought that he just wanted to try, but he never expected that after defeating the Dungeon King, he would become so strong. The Dungeon King let out a loud roar. Zhu Yingsu started to run away from him, and he slammed his hand on the ground. Running away, the main character thought that he had nothing left. He turned around and saw that the Dungeon King had leapt at him to attack. He fell to the ground, breaking the floor beneath him. The main character was thrown aside by the shock wave. As he landed on his feet, he thought that it was already a miracle that he had escaped its grasp, and now he had no solutions at all. He thought about how he had thought that before, and sometimes people don't realize the power they have and think they can't do anything. The dialogue box asked if it wanted to open a status window. The main character replied that he didn't mean it that way, but the status window was already open in front of his face. Glancing to the side, he noticed the Dungeon King's paw approaching. He jumped on it and ran up it. He thought about how he had purposely invested 1 point in magic before, and even though it was only 1 point, it would be enough. In this manhwa, in order to use most magic spells, you only need 2 things, sufficient magic power and a spell. As an author, Zhu Yingsu knows every spell in this world because he made them all up. He thought about the fact that there was one spell that would be enough for one magic point, and that was the explosion spell. Pushing off, the main character jumped up. He slammed the pickaxe into the wall and hung on, thinking that this position should work. He shouted that he would fight to the end. The Dungeon King opened its mouth and extended its hand towards him. The main character, holding a magic mineral in his hands, shouted, "Fukai Ruota." He threw a crystal glowing with purple energy down. The Dungeon King looked at the approaching crystal. The crystal fell at his feet. It began to glow brightly with purple energy, and the main character thought that blowing up 25 tons of magic minerals in an instant is a real luxury. There was a big explosion. A dialogue box announced that the mission to kill the Underground King had been completed. The dialogue boxes read, 50 points received. Received a special reward, wound repair, 1 time. Zhu Yingxu, wrapped in purple energy, thought that he was already stronger than Yasuo, who had only managed to kill 3 scavengers by now, and that was more than being a little stronger. He thought that Yasuo had been fighting a desperate battle with Lisai, and it would be a piece of cake for him. He calmly opened his eyes. The chains that bound him broke apart. The fingers on Lisha's hand were broken, and he screamed in pain. Eyes bulging, he shouted about how he dared to harm him, and repeated that he would kill him. He saw a fist approaching. Zhu Yingxu slapped him across the face, sending him flying backwards. It crashed into the wall with a crash. The main character with a calm face thought about him talking less, because it would be bad if it affected the rating. Uncle Ben opened his mouth in surprise, thinking about how he was able to defeat Li Qi and his soldiers in one blow. Li Qi and his soldiers were lying on the ground. A steel collar with a chain once again appeared on the main character's neck. With a chuckle, Lisai said that as long as there was a slave contract, no matter where he got his strength or how strong he became, the chain would follow him like a shadow. Lisai laughed madly and shouted that he would always be his slave. The main character paused and left. Lisai asked where he was going. The main character stood in front of a stone wall. Lisai asked why he was standing there. Zhu Yingxu smashed the wall in front of him. Licky asked in surprise how he knew where he had hidden all the contracts. The main character thought that he knew because he was the author. He said he hid it at random. He thought that Lisai should be grateful to him because Yasuo tortured him for a long time before he finally told him where he kept the contracts. He tossed the burning torch into the pile of contracts. Standing with his back to the fire, he shouted to everyone that the slave contracts had been destroyed. He smiled and shouted that they were free from slavery. People cheered and thanked him. The collar on the protagonist's neck opened and his shackles fell to the ground. He thought about how, after destroying the contracts, the magic-enhanced shackles were automatically unlocked. They decided to build a village nearby after leaving the mine, and Lisai and his subordinates would most likely be the main labor force in building the village. Uncle Ben was chosen as the head of the village. As he neared the exit of the mine, the protagonist thought that in the original version, Yasuo led a group of people in a rebellion against Lisha, and even though they won, they still lost a lot of people. He wondered if he'd done better. Shielding himself from the bright light with his hand, Zhu Yingxu said that they finally saw the sunlight. Above the ravine, a ship hovered in the air, chained to the ground. The protagonist thought about how they had a month before the Demon King broke the seal and brought an endless war with him to this land. Whether it was Yasuo or other countries, they were all caught off guard, and since Zhu Yingxu knows that this is going to happen, he can't just sit back and wait for it to happen. He thought about the fact that this world wasn't identical to the one he had drawn, and hasty actions could lead to death. He decided that he should first understand his own abilities. He asked the administrator to open the status window. A status window appeared in front of him. The main character thought about how he got 50 points for defeating the Dungeon King, spent 30 points to strengthen and left 20 points for an emergency. But there's still too little information here. He noticed a page switching feature. He thought that he hadn't noticed it before, and it should have appeared after the administrator took control of the stat points panel. The main character asked him to switch to the next page. On the dialogue box in front of him were 2 Manhwa chapters. Zhu Yingxu thought that he had been through a lot. He only got 2 chapters of Manhwa out of it. He noticed that the second chapter received a lot more likes and subscriptions than the first. The receptionist said that it was because he defeated an underground king that the original protagonist didn't stand a chance against, and gained the reader's respect. He asked him to keep working hard. The protagonist thought about how he didn't expect that the abandoned drafts would help him gain the reader's approval, and even though he almost lost his life, he now regained the confidence to make this Manhwa better. The dialogue box says, "These values are very important for the author's development. Please take a look at the author's skill list." The main character wondered if there was such a thing. A dialogue box with skills appeared in front of him. It said that the number of favorites is used to unlock skills, and the number of likes is used to activate skills. Zhu Yingxu thought about how exiting and canceling were the author's skills. He thought about how he could unlock more of the author's skills if the number of favorites increased, and if he could unlock all of them, he would be invincible. Looking into the distance, the protagonist thought that in 2 days there would be a conscription ceremony, and those who wanted to join the army could go to the Feng Kingdom on a special magic airship that would be at the port of Merdai. He thought that Yasuo was just one of those people, and he should also enter the troops in this way because that's where he can meet his main character, Princess Tia. Princess Tia stood on the high ground of the arena looking at the units of her army. The main character thought that the support of Princess Tia and the country of Feng is the key to continuing the plot. With a frown on his face, he thought that Tia at the beginning of Manhwa and at the end were two different people since she hadn't turned into a pure-hearted princess yet and it would be difficult to get her support. Zhu Yingsu thought that he was not the same as the original Yasuo. After all, the reward he received for killing the underground king allowed him to improve his stats and skills. He thought that everything was very different, abilities and actions included. Instead of waiting for the demon king to arrive, he decided to take the initiative and kill him before he broke the seal. Frowning confidently, the protagonist wondered what would become of the Manhwa world that had lost its final boss. He thought that he was looking forward to it. At the same time, in the Feng country palace, the voice said that Prince Luozi, Prince Katie, and Princess Tia were requesting an audience. The man sitting on the throne agreed. Ertai Gadi, the king of Feng country, said that there will be an army entry ceremony in 2 days and one member of the royal family is missing. He asked them who would go. The guy in armor with his long hair pulled back in a ponytail, the prince of Feng country, Luozi, the older brother of Princess Tia, said that tomorrow he would have to lead the army and go to the southeast to destroy the evil spirits, and he would not be able to go without a ceremony. The guy with the short hair, the prince of Feng country, Katie, Princess Tia's younger brother, said that the workshop on magic mechanisms that they organized together with the Zhengqi state will be held tomorrow, and he won't be able to either. He said to give their sister the opportunity to participate in the ceremony because she has a lot of free time. He added that she is getting married soon, and she needs to appear more in public, and maybe she can get more support. Tia glared at him and said that no one would think he was mute if he talked less. Katie grinned back. Tia stepped forward and said with a frown that she was refusing to take part in the ceremony. In a month, the demon king Maliati will break the seal and bring endless war to this land. All the evil spirits of the world felt this and became incredibly aggressive. There have been numerous cases of demons attacking humans in recent years. In the land of Feng, where they had no idea what the purpose of the monsters' rebellion was, they defined the degree of danger of these incidents as a catastrophe. The king of Feng country issued a decree to attract volunteers from all over the country to resist the disaster. Zhu Yingsu had just taken the opportunity to approach the royal family. The main character, dressed in armor, stands in the ranks of soldiers. The man on the ship shouted, "Disaster." A large man with a mustache and wearing armor, Fulesi, a mid-ranking commander, said that this was a deadly danger for a huge number of people and a great chance for them. He shouted that they should be proud of it, otherwise, people like them, mud-born people, would never be able to get a chance to enter the Feng kingdom. Frowning, the main character thought that in the original plot, Fulesi was a scheming conspirator who didn't put human life in any way, and if someone didn't obey his orders, they would surely die. He thought that because Yasuo had accidentally angered him, he had almost been beheaded by Yasuo at the military enlistment ceremony. Zhu Yingsu thought that he couldn't be as rash as Yasuo and should definitely take matters into his own hands and turn the plot to his advantage. Frowning, he thought about how he would then take the initiative and defeat him at the recruitment ceremony, gaining Tia's attention, and then he would have a chance to get closer to the royal family. Fulesi shouted for those who weren't afraid of death to get on the ship. The soldiers raised their fists. The loudspeaker announced that there were 10 seconds left before the ship took off and started counting down. The countdown ended and the ship soared into the sky. The ship is flying through the clouds. Looking out the window, the main character thought that even though he was the author, he was still very shocked by what was happening, because he was really flying on the ship that he drew towards the Feng kingdom. A man in armor entered the door and shouted to listen to him. He said they had too many recruits this time and they were too difficult to manage. He said that they will divide everyone into groups of 4 people and choose one commander, and the commander will report on the situation in each group to his superiors. The soldiers obeyed. Looking at the papers, the man asked the main character if he was Zhu Yingsu. The main character replied that it was so. The guy with the dark hair and goatee said he was a member of his group from now on, and they were going to have a group meeting. He called out to him. Frowning, the protagonist agreed and thought about how he understood some of the rules. He thought that when he makes the same decisions as Yasuo, even if it seems random, the events remain the same as in the original plot, and he boarded the ship at the same time as Yasuo and was assigned to the same group as him. Zhu Yingsu thought that this way, he could confidently control the part of the plot that coincided with the original and correct the not-so-good parts over time. A dark-haired guy with a grim grin said that from now on, as members of his team, he hoped they could show off their skills. He said that if they wanted to say something, they'd better keep their mouths shut and then everything would be fine between them. The main character, frowning, thought that he did not need to tell who they are because he invented them. He thought that these guys were originally robbers of magic minerals, and now they joined the military service only to steal these very minerals. He thought that they did not expect that they would immediately be separated, and when they met Yas, they were generally afraid that he would talk a lot and therefore began to intimidate them. Zhu Yingsu thought about how Yasu refused to obey and fought them, and when Fu Lesi found out about this incident, Yasu was recognized as an accomplice of the robbers, after which they were punished and forced to fight to the death during the entry ceremony. Yasu won, but because of his kind nature, he chose not to kill them, and this angered Fu Lexi. He climbed up on the stage and killed 3 people in seconds, preparing to kill Yasu who disobeyed him, and although Yasu managed to dodge the blows, he was no match for him at all. If Tia hadn't intervened, Yasu would have definitely died. Tia frowned and ordered Fu Lesi to stop. The main character thought that if he wanted to use Fu Lei's to get closer to the royal family, then he needed to approach every step of his life with careful caution. First of all, he is not allowed to do the same as Yasu in the original story and fight with these 3 during the service entry ceremony. Instead, he decided to save his strength to face Fu Lexi. He remembered the comments that said, "He hesitates to kill, too holy." The main character was able to survive only thanks to the main character, well, garbage. He lost to the commander again. I won't read this anymore. Zhu Yingsu thought about what he hadn't realized before until he saw such comments, that readers were very fond of beautiful and capable protagonists, and this time, he should rely on his abilities to create an interesting story. A dialogue box announced that he had received a limited time task, become the boss of these 3. The main character calmly glanced at the dialogue box and thought that this was what he needed. Glancing at the dialogue box, he noticed that there was something written on it in small print. Failure to complete the task would result in a lower Manhwa rating. Swearing at the administrator, the main character thought that 10 seconds is too short. A guy with dark hair shouted that he was talking to him and asked why he was looking around. The countdown dialogue box. Zhu Yingsu panicked and shouted if he could be in charge. He added that he will do whatever they say. The boys looked at each other in disbelief, saying that they didn't understand what he was talking about. Frowning, the protagonist thought that he didn't have time and would have to solve this problem by force, and he would think about the rest after completing the task. He charged, swinging his fist, and shouted that he was begging them to let him be in charge. The boys exclaimed irritably that this didn't sound like a request. With his kick, he threw them into the air. Opening his mouth in surprise, the protagonist thought that he had forgotten that they were in the sky. The guys fell over the side of the ship. The main character grabbed the hand of the guy with dark hair, and the others grabbed each other. Closing his eye tightly, Zhu Yingsu thought that if they fell, then it would all be over. A guy with dark hair with tears in his eyes frowned and shouted at him not to let go and pick them up. He shouted that they would do whatever he said. The main character shouted at him to call him boss. The boys shouted, "Boss." The dialogue box announced that the task was completed. On the dialogue box as it was written, received 10 points. Received 13 reader likes. The loudspeaker announced that they would be arriving in the Feng Kingdom soon. The voice ordered them to leave the cabin in their own groups and go on deck. The main character was sitting on the floor, surrounded by guys. One of them admired the fact that he would do anything for the sake of power. Zhu Yingsu replied with a grim face that he had had a dream of becoming someone powerful since childhood. The guy replied that this punch was very convincing, and now they, the 3 Maki brothers, will follow him. Fu Lexi was standing in front of him, asking if someone could explain to him what had happened. The main character's fist mark was visible on the guy's armor. Fu Lexi said that it seemed that someone on the ship was restless. The main character thought that at this rate they would be punished by the 4 of them, and he would be able to change the plot. He held up his hand, saying it was him. The guys jumped up from their seats, shouting that the 3 of them had fought, and the main character had nothing to do with it. Opening his mouth in surprise, Zhu Yingsu wondered why they were taking the blame, since it was tantamount to suicide. He remembered that he had attributed the trait that they became Yasu's opponents only because they were on opposite sides, but now he was their boss. Fu Lexi grinned viciously and said that there was a tradition for recruits to fight each other at the enlistment ceremony, and he was worried that he didn't have any candidates this year. However, since they liked to fight so much, they might fight each other to the death at the ceremony. The main character thought that now the situation has nothing to do with him, and he cannot allow the story to develop in this direction. Thinking that he needed to do something, he swung his fist. Fu Lexi caught his fist with his hand. Frowning, he said that he never asked the reasons of a person who was seeking his own death and only granted their wish. He asked how he wanted to die, to be hung upside down from a wall, to be burned to death by the sun, or to be beheaded in public. Zhu Yingsu frowned, glad in his mind that he had caught his attention. He said he had heard about his reputation and asked if he could challenge him to a duel at this year's induction ceremony. He said that if he could choose how to die, he would like to die on stage. The Mac brothers opened their mouths in shock, asking if he was crazy to challenge the general. Fu Leixi, wrapped in a red aura, said that he was interesting, and he had never thought of killing someone in front of the entire country and the royal family at the service entry ceremony. Agreeing, he said that he would appear before the public in all its glory in a wedding suit made from his corpse. Frowning, the protagonist smirked and thought that he had taken the bait. The Kingdom of Feng. On the purple screen above the city, a man with a mustache and glasses was visible. The voice greeted the people of the Feng Kingdom. He introduced himself as Zhu Bof, the royal caretaker, and said that he would like to remind everyone that the enlistment ceremony was about to begin and invited everyone to watch. He said that members of the royal family will also attend. A voice in the crowd asked which royal family member they thought would be coming. Laughing, the crowd said that it was obvious that that stupid princess had come. Feng Kingdom Arena, the gathering place for the ceremony. The arena was a huge circular structure without a roof. Frowning, Zhu Yingxu thought that he was far inferior to Fu Leixi in strength, which meant that it would not be easy to defeat him and he would have to be cunning. He thought that he was just a man who a character right now and couldn't guarantee that the situation would be 100% under his control. However, he had no other choice. The voice announced the start of the induction ceremony and called for a welcome to Princess Tia, who is presenting the royal family with her speech. Frowning, she said that the recent demon rampage had really scared the people of this continent, and her father was constantly thinking about how to stop it, which was why they were so actively recruiting people this time. Looking at her, the main character thought that he finally saw her. Tia said that, to their relief, many warriors responded to the summons. Recalling how her body had shattered into small pieces, Zhu Yingxu thought that this time, he wouldn't allow something like this to happen to her again. Tia said that their participation made a great contribution to the strength of their kingdom's army. She thought about how she was determined not to come here. She remembered telling the king that she refused to come to the ceremony. The king replied that her brothers had much more important things to do, and they didn't have time to distract themselves from them. He said it was her duty as a princess to attend the ceremony. Frowning, she started to protest, but the king cut her off, forbidding her to object. He told her to leave. Tia slammed the door behind her. She thought that neither her father, Katie, nor Lozi understood. She recalled the words of others that she was a nobody without her status and appearance, that her brothers were so good that she seemed like an extra, and that she was very lucky to have status and wealth, being a beautiful dummy. She remembered the voice saying that it thought she heard them. Another voice answered, asking, "So what?" The voice asked if he wasn't complimenting her on how lucky she was. Another voice said that she was in such a good position that they would stop calling her a dummy as soon as she tried to do anything. Tia thought about how no one would even see her attempt. She recalled the words that they would definitely win because Prince Luozi was leading their fight, that Prince Luozi was the best, and that he was the guardian angel of the Feng Kingdom. She also remembered the words that Prince Katie was a genius, that he had invented an incredible magical device as a child, that he had found the perfect solution to the northern food problem, and that he was the future of their kingdom. Closing her eyes with tears, Tia thought that she also wanted to be like them, contribute to the kingdom and be a source of pride for her subjects. Looking at the notes on her hand, Tia said that she believes that with their contribution, they will definitely be able to overcome this disaster. The crowd of soldiers raised their fists in glee. She thought about how she could leave now, and she didn't have anything else to do here. Fu Leixi asked her to stay because he had something to report to her. Thinking how much of a hassle this was, she ordered him to speak. Pointing his finger at the protagonist, he shouted that the man had disregarded military discipline and decided to challenge him as his commanding officer. Fu Leixi suggested that the rookie duel should be replaced with a duel between them. He said that on the one hand, he would be able to use it as an example for new recruits to learn a lesson about military discipline, and on the other, they would be able to lighten the mood at this induction ceremony. Tia thought that this old man just wanted to beat up the rookie and show that he was in charge. Laughing, she said that she didn't think it was necessary and everything would continue as usual. Fu Leixi agreed. The protagonist thought that saying it so obviously wouldn't work, because Tia only wants to get out of here as soon as possible. Tia said that, in that case, he was leaving the event. Zhu Yingxu said with a smile that he was very sorry. After all, fighting a general was such a rare opportunity. He said that he was sure that the princess had important matters to attend to and was in such a hurry to leave. He asked her if she wanted to join Prince Luozi on his expedition or attend a seminar with Prince Katie. Tia stopped, her eyes opening in surprise. The main character said that he is sure that any of these events are more important than the service entry ceremony. Tia's eyes widened in shock. Turning around, she wondered how he knew about this if her brother's assignments hadn't been made public. She thought he was like that. Tia said that he wouldn't take part in their tasks. Zhu Yingxu thought that he expected nothing less from his female lead. She wouldn't lie to find an excuse. He asked her if she didn't have anything urgent to do, why didn't she stay and watch their duel? Frowning, Tia told Fu Leixi that he was right and he was indeed a cheeky person. She asked me to take care of finding out its origin. She thought about how he wouldn't dare make a fool of her. The main character smilingly told her not to worry and said that he was just a small minor, and in the end, a person is always waiting for death. He said that he just wanted to die with honor on this stage. He thought that getting her to fall into her trap was noticeably harder than he thought, and he had no other choice. The main character said with a smile that it was better than being a dummy all my life. Tia cursed furiously in her head. Fu Leixi looked at him in surprise and thought that he was no doubt willing to offend the royal family just for the sake of dueling with him. He thought that to do such a thing, he must be either a stupid or unusual person. Fu Leixi assumed with a grim face that he had an influential background or was deliberately pretending to be a fool to make him relax. Tia said that since he was so determined to die, she would help him. She announced that the duel would begin immediately. In her mind, she told him to show her what he could do. Frowning, the protagonist thought that his plan had worked and that he felt sorry for Tia. He thought that if he hadn't attracted her attention in ways that would hurt her the most, an ordinary soldier like him would never have been able to force the princess to stay. Glancing at Fu Leixi, he thought that the most important thing was that this was the only way to make Fu Leixi suspect him. The main character thought that because of his cautious nature, he most likely started worrying about whether he had a strong background, and as long as he had this advantage, he had a chance of winning. Tia asked them to come on stage. Zhu Yingxu and Fu Leixi stepped onto the stage, and they were inside a purple transparent cube. Folding his hands on his sword, Fu Leixi said that he would explain to him, the naughty boy from the village, what this glowing field of energy was called. The main character replied that it was called a magic barrier, and after entering it, he could never leave it until the winner was announced. Fu Leixi clicked his tongue and said that he knew a lot. He frowned and said that it wouldn't help him, and that magic barrier would disappear after a single move. Tia announced the start of the duel. Fu Leixi and the main character were facing each other in battle stances. Fu Leixi disappeared and appeared in front of the main character, striking out with his sword. Zhu Yingxu blocked the blow with his sword. Grinning, he asked if that was what he meant by killing with one punch. He thought that he was in a lot of pain. His arm was about to break, which was to be expected from Fu Leixi. Frowning, he shouted that he was being presumptuous. He thought about how the strength of the fist that he had caught earlier wasn't enough to block it. He assumed that he was holding back on purpose. There was an explosion between them, and they jumped back in opposite directions. The soldiers cheered that he was actually able to take General Fu Leix's punch. Another guy in the crowd shouted that Fu Leixi was a newly appointed general, and being able to take a hit from him meant that he had at least the strength of a commander. The crowd shouted that he was strong and that they didn't expect this. Fu Leixi cursed angrily. As he approached the main character, he asked how they could praise a non-entity like him and leave him in the background. Oni said that he would chop them all into pieces as soon as he got down from this stage. Zhu Yingxu pointed at him with his sword and said that unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to do it. Fu Leixi asked what he had just said. With a frown, the main character said that he was the one who would come out of this magic barrier. The afternoon sun was shining over the arena. The main character was thrown back by the force of the impact. Gritting his teeth, he thought that the difference in strength was too great, and he didn't have the combat experience that Fu Leixi had. He thought that he would still hold on no matter what. He started to climb to his feet, and Fu Leixi said that he would see how much longer he could hold on. Frowning, the protagonist told him that he didn't seem to understand that he was becoming increasingly useless in the princess' eyes. Fu Leixi charged at him, shouting for him to die. Opening his eyes wide, he wondered if this attack would be from the left or the right. He thought that he should know because he is the author. He remembered playing a game while sitting on the couch with a gamepad. After losing, he thought that the swordsman was very good at this game. He thought that he had added the same skills as Fu Leixi, especially the long-range lightning attack. After dodging his attack, Zhu Yingxu gritted his teeth and thought that even the wind from his attacks was dangerous for him. He thought that he couldn't give up now. The wind from Fu Leixi's attack left 3 cuts on his cheek. Frowning, Fu Leixi glanced in his direction and thought that he had dodged his attack at the last moment. Frowning, the protagonist told him that he could do better. Fu Leixi swung his sword in front of him, and the protagonist dodged by jumping up. Noticing that he had dodged his attack again, he wondered if he could predict his movements. The main character jumped on top of him, swinging his sword. He slashed out with his sword, and Fu Leixi blocked his attack with his hand. Gritting his teeth, Zhu Yingxu thought that he couldn't even break through his armor and that he had to hurry because he would die if the fight continued. Smiling, he said that he hoped it wasn't General Fu Leix's full power. The veins on Fu Leix's forehead bulged with anger. Cursing, he swung his sword in front of him, and the force of the blow knocked the protagonist back. Opening his mouth wide in pain, he thought that it was very painful, and even knowing the character, he couldn't dodge its attack. Looking at Zhu Yingxu lying on the ground, Fu Leixi thought that he had finally done it. Standing next to him, he said that he was worried that he was one of those people who hid their real strength, but he realized that he was just an arrogant fool who didn't know his place. Raising his fist, he exclaimed that the victory was his. He shouted about how it happens if you disrespect him, how it happens to those who rebel against the Feng Kingdom and everyone who becomes an enemy of the Feng Kingdom. Princess Tia, the soldiers, the townspeople, and the king listened intently to his speech. Fu Lesi said that he would tear them to pieces. Swinging his sword, he shouted for the protagonist to die. The main character is lying on the ground with his fists clenched. The impact sent a cloud of dust into the air. The Maki brothers excitedly called out to their leader. Standing in the cloud of dust, Fu Lexi thought that it was over and the words he just said would definitely raise him in rank. Looking around, he wondered why the barrier still hadn't disappeared. Zhu Yingxu jumped out of the dust cloud. Fu Lexi turned around, and a fist slammed into his face. The impact sent him flying into the barrier, causing it to be covered with cracks at the site of the collision. The soldiers cheered that Zhu Yingxu hadn't died and that he was very strong. The main character stood in a cloud of dust with his eyes closed and thought about how he almost died, and Fu Lexi's attack was dangerous. Fu Lexi asked what it was. He thought about how it was possible that his power was instantly multiplied and who he really was. Frowning, the protagonist thought that fortunately, he still had 20 unallocated points. He thought that he had no choice but to use all of his points in order to increase his strength. The status window read, Power 28, Magic 11, Endurance 6, Agility 5, Perception 2. A dialogue box announced that all points had been used up. Frowning, the protagonist shouted that he was an ordinary miner and he had come here to volunteer to serve the Feng Kingdom. However, Fu Lexi was angry at him for a small simple incident, and if he lost this battle, he would be executed. He shouted that he didn't come here to die, but to go to war and exterminate the demons. He said he needed the help of the entire public. People in the crowd were asking what he was doing, and how dare he ask for help in a fight to the death. One person in the crowd coughed and said that it was fun, especially since judging from the fight, this rookie is strong on par with Fu Lexi. The people in the crowd raised their fists in the air in glee, supporting him and calling for the general to be killed. The main character stood surrounded by the shouts of the crowd. Tia was surprised to see that the entire audience had taken the rookie's side and Lieutenant Fu Lexi had lost the advantage. Fu Lexi said gloomily about how they dared to support a low-ranking soldier. The main character thought about what was about to start. Fu Lexi furiously said that he would kill everyone. The protagonist thought that when Fu Lexi goes into a rage, he enters a state of insanity, and in this state, his strength is doubled, but he will not come to his senses and will indiscriminately attack anyone he deems hostile. Fu Lexi stood wrapped in purple energy and shouted furiously. The protagonist with a calm face thought that this was his key to victory, and he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. He thought about how when they were on the boat, he had attacked him, but it wasn't just to initiate a confrontation with him, it was also to make him think that he was weak. He thought that other than that, he was very crafty and wouldn't accept a challenge if he wasn't sure he could win, so the protagonist had no choice but to provoke him and the princess, which angered the proud general. He thought that sooner or later it would end. Zhu Yingxu thought that the person who was trying to regain his reputation was killed by him while bragging about his victory. He decided it was a good ending. Glancing to the side, he thought that if he stood still, he would no longer be considered a hostile person in Fu Lex's eyes, and he would start attacking the public instead. The guy shouted at Fu Lexi that he was stupid and sent him home to grow potatoes, just like the grumpy old man should. Laughing, he added that he had never treated recruits like human beings, and he got what he deserved. Fu Lexi ran furiously, and the protagonist thought that the Make brothers had caught his attention in time. Fu Lexi kicked off the ground and burst through the magic barrier, shattering it into fragments. Zhu Yingxu thought that now that Fu Lexi had lost control, he would break through the barrier to attack them, and the barrier's defense mechanism would be activated. He thought that the barrier's defense mechanism would trap anyone who tried to leave the battlefield by force. The long purple magic tentacles grabbed Fu Lexi, causing him to hang suspended in midair. Zhu Yingxu thought that in terms of strength, he was no match for Fu Lexi. However, now that he was trapped, it was time to hunt. The main character glanced at Fu Lexi, who was suspended in the air.